Hi, we are students from the Nonprofit Ethics and Governance course at University of Iowa. My name is Payton Zentz.
My name is Lindsey Gorzelanny.
My name is Mikia Stegner.
My name is Dustin Rittenhouse.
And my name is Jane Holish.
This semester, we have been learning about the Hoover Presidential Foundation, its mission, values, and culture. We have spoken with members of the foundation and reviewed the organization's policies and procedures. In our lectures for this semester, we have learned about best practices for nonprofit organizations and have applied this knowledge to our review of the foundation's policies. The following presentation is a culmination of our work for this semester and a collection of our recommendations.
To start is the Code of Ethics. We're unsure of the revision date. We would like to list the date on the petitions in order to best understand what the vision is for a trustee in the current times. Also, along with that revision date, it'd be good to revisit it and possibly revise the document on an annual basis and make sure to include the new board trustee handbook. The petition is vague and states that trustees must have ethics. This should be listed more so as morally positive ethics for the best interest of the foundation, just as an example. Under must-haves, it would be good to list that the trustees should have a commitment to the foundation and its mission. This would be a good replacement for passion for the mission. Commitment is going to be something that you're going to need for your nonprofit organization. Under must-haves, another statement that could be added is devotion for upholding the Code of Ethics, as this is super important. Overall, the petition is well-written and well-organized along with the Code of Ethics. It lists the expectations of the trustees clearly and also lists the mission and vision of the organization very well.
In our project, we also looked at the budget to look at spending patterns and see if there are any risks present there. And we did find that the expense ratio presents a risk to the organization. This is primarily because of accountability and public trust. Of course, as nonprofit organizations, we rely on the public trust of individuals and donors to fuel our organization. And without that public trust, the organization can't survive. Organizations like Charity Navigator keep track of accountability to help potential donors and help citizens keep organizations accountable, and to help organizations keep track of this as well. From Charity Navigator, the Hoover Foundation received a failing rating, and this is primarily because of their expense ratio. For any organization that uses less than half of their expenses toward programming, the Charity Navigator automatically gives them a 0 in that category, and that's a very significant portion of their rating. As you can see on this pie chart, the biggest slice of the pie is general and administrative expenses. And then the next biggest, the salmon slice, is fundraising. These are non-program related expenses, and they take over 50% of the budget. So unfortunately, the Hoover Foundation does receive a failing score in this category. With the capital campaign, this is something that's very important to keep track of, since we're trying to attract new donors to the foundation and make sure that the foundation is kind of putting its best foot forward. This is so important to organizations like Charity Navigator because it's an indication of mission adherence and efficiency. If such a big portion of the expenses are being used toward administration, maybe it's indicating that the organization is not running as efficiently as it possibly could, and that those expenses should be taken a look at. And it's also not reflecting the commitment to the mission and being mission driven as the organization is promoting. So we suggest that the Hoover Foundation would diligently review all of their expenses and make sure they're all categorized correctly so that the organization itself and the public can see an accurate portrayal of how the organization's funds are being used and how they're being spent. This is important for the public and the foundation as well. And then make sure you review those. And then if the expense ratio is still not up to best practices, then reallocate those expenses as necessary to make sure that this expense ratio is in the green.
We also looked at your bylaws, and the last revision was in 2018. We did have a few more suggestions before the 2022 calendar year. We suggest having a strategic planning meeting with all of the board. And now that you are moving to in-person at the museum, suggesting a board retreat or a meeting where all of your board of trustees can either Zoom or meet in person to vote on the recommended number of board trustees moving forward, and also evaluate the performance of each board trustee to make sure they're meeting the requirements for being part of the board, such as financial commitment and participation in meetings. We also suggest revisiting the committees and the committee chairs. And if you do decide to limit some of the number of board of trustees, moving those roles into committees, and then as a result, establishing enforcing term limits for the board trustees. We looked at your current committees and we found them to be all useful and helpful, and providing efficient and a board. And so making sure that you are splitting those committees amongst the board of trustees to have a chair and also have 3 to 5 participants per committee. We also have a few recommendations for additional committees, one being the Human Resources Committee. In your employee handbook, you mentioned the Human Resources Committee chair, and currently in your bylaws, there's no Human Resource Committee. Also suggest new membership to help orientate and educate the new trustees to make sure that they are aware of the code of ethics and the conflict of interest and board expectations, and specifically the mission and values of the foundation. Another suggestion would be adding a governance committee to review the bylaws and recommend changes, and also to ensure that each person is participating in a committee or two. Another suggestion would be just relooking the finance committee to make sure the treasurer is chairing the finance committee, and with the chairman is having authorized access to make the financial decisions for the foundation with board approval.
So next we reviewed your whistleblower policy. The trustee whistleblower policy we noticed is listed as a preliminary draft, and we suggest that you update this and review it to get it finalized as soon as possible, so you have a concrete policy that is complete and thorough and isn't still labeled as a draft. The draft is specific to disagreements among trustees, and we suggest that a comprehensive whistleblower policy should also be included under the compliance issues in the employee manual. We also noticed that in the whistleblower policy, confidentiality is referenced to, and the only guidelines given for this confidentiality are confidentiality to the extent practicable and reasonable. And we think that there should be more specific parameters in a more thorough section, because confidentiality is such a key part of protecting whistleblowers. And we also suggest that you consider adding remedies for possible retaliation against any actor within the organization who brings an issue forward. And we also suggest that you review the National Council of Nonprofit Sample Whistleblower Protection Policy. We have that linked in Appendix A in our document, and consider making any other additions to that.
Next, we reviewed the employee handbook. Our recommendations are to ensure that formatting and grammar is concise throughout the handbook. We found some discrepancies, including the date from the title page, which was dated 2016, and the last page of the employee handbook, which was dated in 2007. We'd also see that you would clarify vacation time. It states that there are 12 paid holidays, but 2 were simply crossed out. And there's also discrepancies on how PTO is gained. And so we'd like to see that cleared up. There's also insensitive language in the pregnancy, which reflects on that is treated as an illness or disease. So we'd like to see that updated to reflect sensitivity and inclusion. We'd also see increased clarity in what is acceptable for expenditures for employees, including the credit card policy, which needs to be reworded to set expectations for expenditures. Travel expenditures needs to be clear and set the expectations for what is considered moderate and appropriate. And professional development simply states right now to submit an estimated cost. And we'd like to see parameters set for that. Additional clarification is needed for discipline, which needs a balance between informal and formal systems to keep both a record of the issue and to withhold to compliance and make sure that everything is recorded. We also need clarity in who the chair of the Human Resources Committee would be, because in the handbook, it is stated that they should be referred to for issues of discrimination and harassment. And lastly, job descriptions are needed to be completed and added for the Vice President of Development, Communications Director, and the Executive Director of Development and Planned Giving. And all the other job descriptions need to be simply updated and revised, as many of them have not seen revisions since 2007.
Another policy to be updated is the conflict of interest policy. Just a few things to be added. Simple as language is adding associates, and also a disciplinary action clause for violation of conflict of interest. Currently, there is no statement of what occurs if a violation happens. And so simply defining it as a failure to disclose a conflict of interest or failure to comply with the conflict of interest policy. And then finally, just filing and keeping a record of all the conflict of interest signed documents and by the secretary, just to have on file moving forward.
And these were some of the other documents that we reviewed. We didn't see the need for any additions. We would just recommend looking at Appendix A of the gift acceptance policy as it has not been revised since 1999 and is in need of review. And we were also unsure of revision dates for several of the other documents. And we recommend that if they're to be reviewed soon, that the dates be shown along with that. So thank you. We have really enjoyed the opportunity to work with the Hoover Presidential Foundation this semester, and we hope you find our recommendations helpful.